In this very in-depth forecast, a large tornado outbreak is expected later this afternoon for the Central Plains. The possibility of discrete to semi-discrete and messy convection in a highly conducive environment will support the potential for multiple strong to violent tornadoes, massive hailstones upwards of 2 to 3 inches, and widespread and destructive damaging wind gusts. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for April 27th of 2024. For today we have a moderate risk for southeastern Kansas, central Oklahoma into north central Texas, into very extreme southwestern portions of Missouri there, with a slight risk that extends all the way from northern Michigan into south central Texas there, with an enhanced risk that extends all the way up into southern Nebraska into southern Iowa. Risks for today do include a 15% tornado risk, including the possibility of strong tornadoes. We could definitely see the possibility for multiple strong to potentially violent tornadoes in that moderate threat area, and the potential for tornadoes extends all the way from the slight risk in the south for southwestern Texas there into northern Michigan there. For our damaging wind risk, we do have a 30% for the moderate risk area, where we could see the potential for some destructive wind gusts. And then for our hail risk, we do have a 45% risk for large hail, with a very large hatched region where we could see the potential for some massive hailstones. For tomorrow, we have a slight risk for more of the Midwestern regions into the Mississippi River Valley area, as well as down into the Mississippi River Valley and the southern Central Plains. For southern Iowa, western Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, northern Louisiana, eastern Texas, eastern Oklahoma, and in eastern Kansas. Risks for tomorrow do include a 5% tornado risk, where we could see the potential for a couple of tornadoes, 15% damaging wind risk, where we could see the potential for some scattered damaging wind gusts, as well as a 15% hail risk, where we could see the potential for some scattered large hail. For our day 3 outlook, we do have a marginal risk for the southern Central Plains into the Mississippi River Valley here, for southern Texas into eastern Texas, Louisiana, southern Arkansas, and the southern half of Mississippi there. Taking a look at our WPC outlook, starting off with the excessive rainfall forecast. For today, we do have a moderate risk for the moderate risk area for southeastern Kansas, central Oklahoma, north central Texas, into portions of southwestern Missouri there. Risks for today do include the potential for some widespread flash flooding and some flash flooding that could definitely be significant in some regions. For tomorrow, we do have a slight risk for mainly around the Mississippi River Valley region into the Arklatex region, for southern Missouri, Arkansas, eastern Oklahoma, and eastern Texas into northern Louisiana there, where we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding. Then for our day 3 outlook, we do have a slight risk that continues to move into the Mississippi River Valley region for western Tennessee, eastern Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and portions of eastern Texas there. Taking a look at our winter weather outlooks for today, we don't really expect to really see anything too significant as far as heavy snowfall, but we could definitely see some heavy snowfall in some elevated portions of the Rockies. Same for tomorrow, and same with our day 3 outlook. Taking a look at our 500 millibars as well as our surface observations and how those are going to work in conjunction to support the risk for severe thunderstorms for today. As of right now, we do have a pretty strong 500 millibar trough that is advecting out of the south-southwest here, with a 500 millibar jet streak upwards of 70 to 80 miles per hour, which will definitely encourage storm development. We'll definitely be able to support the risk for severe thunderstorms as a result. We will definitely see a very large amount of speed shear come out of this to support a very widespread and very significant hail risk for today. And then as far as our surface observations go, we do have a surface low that is back up into the Oklahoma Panhandle region into southeastern Colorado, with a dry line that is draped across western Texas into western Oklahoma, and that has fired off some additional development ongoing, and that should continue to see upscale growth over the next couple of hours. And then as this stationary front slowly pushes off to the north, we could see some additional development along that stationary front as it turns into a warm front and kind of positions itself in this vicinity. We could definitely see some additional tornadic development and potentially some strong tornadic development up into northern Kansas there along that warm front. Taking a look at our low-level jet and how that will affect our directional shear for our tornado risk for today. As of right now, we do have a pretty strong, more localized low-level jet that is in front of our storms that are currently ongoing. So we are definitely seeing some pretty strong directional shear ahead of our storms that are already ongoing with a low-level jet upwards of 60 miles per hour, which will definitely supply this region with some pretty decent directional shear. And we could definitely see a tornadic risk come out of some of the storms that are already ongoing. And this low-level jet should continue to strengthen over the next couple of hours and become overall more widespread across this region and potentially reach upwards of 50 to 60 to the upper 40 miles per hour across this entire region. And that will definitely supply this region with some really strong directional shear and be very supportive of the potential for tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how that's going to affect our overall risk for severe thunderstorms with our spreading of our wind vectors as well as our speed shear for our hail risk. As of right now, we don't really have an extremely strong 200 millibar jet, but it is definitely pretty strong with 200 millibar flow upwards of 80 knots to 70 knots across this region. And we have some very subtle spreading of our wind vectors. It's not really too noticeable, but that very small amount of influence could definitely go a very long way and will definitely aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. It may be more so back up into Kansas where we see the majority of our defluence along that warm frontal zone, but still will definitely be a aid for our overall risk for severe thunderstorms further off to the north there. And then as far as our speed shear goes with that decently strong 200 millibar jet and how strong our 500 millibar jet is, even if our 200 millibar jet isn't terribly strong, our 500 millibar jet is definitely extremely strong and will definitely support a very large amount of speed shear across this region, be very supportive of a significant hail risk. Taking a look at our storm relative helicity and how that will affect our overall risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see some really strong storm relative helicity values that are going to strengthen overall later on in the afternoon. However, as of right now, with some of the storms that are currently ongoing, we definitely have some more lower end storm relative helicity values, upwards of 100, 150 to 160, which is still supportive of a tornado risk across this region, especially with the amount of moisture and instability that you will see later. However, our storm relative helicity is expected to increase later on whenever we have a much more increased low-level jet later on, with storm relative helicity values in front of storms that could potentially reach upwards of 300 to 400, which will definitely be very supportive of the potential for significant tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our bulk shear and how that will affect our risk for hail across this region, we are expected to see some pretty strong bulk shear values that are backing our storms as of right now, with bulk shear values that are upwards of 60 knots across this region, 50 to 60 knots, and that is expected to continue to stay in place later on in the afternoon. In the main hail risk potentially increase to maybe around 70 to 80 knots in some regions, and maybe getting very close to some 90 knots of bulk shear in some regions, and that would be very, very supportive of the potential for some massive hailstones across this region. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity and how that will indicate our timing, as well as some general radar analysis, each new model run, this is getting even more and more concerning, with some early convection that is ongoing that will likely move out of the region over the next couple of hours, but our models have been trending to more of a discrete mode setting up across this region. Our HRRR is definitely an outlier with a more messy and more linear setup here. However, in the observations, not the surface observations, but the observed soundings that we will look at later on in this forecast, they definitely predict more of a semi-discrete mode to discrete mode across this region. So the HRRR is definitely more of an outlier, and we definitely have a much greater potential to see a more discrete mode, and if that is possible, we definitely have the potential of this moderate risk being upgraded to a high risk. That is definitely not out of the question, and there is absolutely an insane amount of agreement from many other forecasters that are very well known that this could definitely be upgraded to a high risk and a 30% tornado risk across this region. That is definitely not out of the question if we can maintain a discrete mode. and again, our HRRR is definitely more of an outlier here. If I were to switch to our other models here, like for example our FSA, that definitely shows what the worst case scenario could definitely look like, with multiple discrete supercells setting up along the dry line here and moving into the Oklahoma City region. We could definitely see a little bit more of a linear mode that may develop further down to the south, or it could stay as a semi-discrete mode. We definitely have the potential for a more discrete mode across this region, and if that is going to stay still, if we can still see a discrete mode later on this afternoon, which seems to be the most plausible outcome, we will definitely have, or not definitely, but we could definitely see the potential for a high risk being added on our 1230Z, our 1630Z, or in other words, our 12:30 p.m. EST outlook from the SPC. We definitely could see the potential for a high risk being added later on this afternoon, and we could still see the potential for multiple strong tornadoes and potentially violent tornadoes with this parameter space, even if we don't have that upgrade. This is definitely a very dangerous situation. We can go over the timing here. But I'm going to switch back over to HRRR just because I kind of trust that more over our FSA models. But we do have some storms that are currently ongoing. Those will likely move out into the Kansas region by 4 p.m. We could see some of them become more robust and definitely lead to the potential for tornadoes. But the majority of our risk will develop as the potential for some semi-discrete mode, some semi-discrete cells to discrete cells along the dry line, potentially setting up anywhere from 3 p.m. to potentially 5 p.m. And those will move into the Oklahoma City region with maybe a little bit more of a linear mode setting up here around 10 to 9 p.m. across this region. And that will likely organize into more of an MCV or MCS-like feature with more of a damaging wind gust risk and the potential for some embedded tornadoes, but definitely more of a damaging wind gust risk and a large hail risk when this does organize into more of a linear system by around our very late evening hours, by around 10 p.m. to midnight across this region. Taking a look at our dew points and how that will affect our instability for our overall risk for severe thunderstorms. For today, we are expected to see some really strong moisture values across this region, with dew point values that could potentially reach the mid to upper 60s across this region, and even the 80s across central to eastern portions of Oklahoma. And as our storms move eastward, they're going to be an environment that's going to have much greater dew points, upwards of the upper 60s and the low 70s in some regions, which will definitely support some very large amounts of instability across this region. Taking a look at our temperatures and how that's going to affect our instability and our overall risk for severe thunderstorms, we are expected to see some pretty large amounts of heat across this region, with temperatures that could potentially reach upwards of the mid to upper 70s and potentially the low 80s, and that will continue to increase later on into the afternoon, potentially reaching around the low 80s to mid 80s across central Oklahoma. And then as the sun sets, we will see our temperatures drop to around the mid 70s when the sun actually sets and our storms move through the center of the moderate risk area, and that will still definitely harbor some really strong amounts of instability, especially amongst that very large amount of moisture. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that will affect our instability and our risk for hail across this region, we are expected to see some really decent lapse rates values across this region, with lapse rates that could potentially get upwards of 7, the mid 7s to low 7s, which will definitely aid in our overall risk for severe thunderstorms, definitely aid in our instability, and these lapse rates could definitely even be higher in reality than what models are actually indicating. We will show you that later on our satellite, because it has to do with cloud cover, and those stronger lapse rates will also continue later on into the afternoon as well, with lapse rates are going to be continuing in the mid 7s, which will definitely support some instability even into the afternoon hours, definitely aid in a lot of instability in the afternoon hours amongst our very large amounts of moisture. Taking a look at our cloud cover and how that's going to affect our lapse rates. I won't typically do this in a regular forecast, however, I do think it's important to look at because our cloud cover is seriously underperforming compared to what our models are indicating. We have a much larger area where you can actually see the surface of Oklahoma here, where you can see the surface of the earth. There is significantly less cloud cover across Oklahoma than what was indicated on models, and that will skyrocket our instability compared to what our models will be indicating. And this will definitely be a much larger aiding factor in our overall risk for severe thunderstorms later on this afternoon. Taking a look at our convective inhibition, how that will affect our overall risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. As of right now, the cap has broken and there is a little bit of convective inhibition across the warm sector that does still remain, but it will continue to fade away over the next couple of hours. But we continue to see warm air advection out of the southwest at our 700 millibars, and that will keep an elevated mixed layer in place. And by the time that breaks out, that will definitely lead to some explosive storm development across this region and will prevent any parcels from the surface from rising higher up in the atmosphere, and will definitely aid in our instability building across this region, especially with our cloud cover that we have. Everything is coming in place for some really large amounts of instability across this region. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that will affect our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, we are expected to see some really large amounts of MU cape across this region, with cape values upwards of the mid 3,000, which will be more than sufficient to fuel the risk for tornadoes across this region. And our large amounts of instability will continue into the afternoon hours and evening hours, with cape values that are still going to be getting upwards of 3,000 in some regions, and will likely decrease as the sun sets down to like the 2000s, the mid 2000s, and the upper 2000s. We may still get some regions that may get upwards of 3,000, but it will definitely be overall lower end because of the sun setting and the lack of that surface heating. But regardless, this is still more than sufficient to fuel the risk for significant tornadoes. Taking a look at our surface-based cape, I don't really have too much to say about this other than the fact that the majority of our most unstable cape is expected to translate down to our surface-based cape, indicating that storms are expected to be surface-based and will not be elevated and will be able to produce the potential for tornadoes. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that will aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, we are expected to see a pool of some moderately strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability across this region, which will be a massive aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms, especially if we have a surface vorticity across this region. That will definitely make for a hotspot for our cheat code across this region, and will definitely be a massive aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms. And that will continue into the later afternoon hours and evening hours, where we continue to see 0 to 3 kilometer instability that is going to continue to be advected out of the southwest here, and that will continuously fuel our risk for severe thunderstorms, continuing to feed these storms from the south. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that will indicate our risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see some lower end energy helicity index values, but still indicative of the potential for a couple of tornadoes across western Oklahoma, with energy helicity index values upwards of 3 to potentially 4 across this region, which is still indicative of the potential for potentially strong tornadoes across this region. However, as the low level jet increases and we see more widespread shear across this region, we could see energy helicity index values increase to upwards of 7 to 6 across this region, maybe even approaching the 8 in some areas, which will definitely be really high and definitely very supportive of the potential for multiple widespread tornadoes potentially across this region. Definitely could see the potential for widespread significant tornadoes and the potential for some violent tornadoes as well. Taking a look at our SIG-TOR values and how that will indicate the potential for significant tornadoes across this region, we could see the potential for maybe 1 or 2 significant tornadoes with some of these storms that are currently ongoing. However, after the low level jet increases, that will be the primary risk, with some really high energy not energy helicity index values, but SIG-TOR values upwards of 3 to potentially 4 across this region, which will be very indicative of the potential for multiple significant tornadoes and potentially violent tornadoes as well. Taking a look at our damaging wind gust models and how that will indicate the potential for damaging wind gusts across this region. With some of these storms that are currently ongoing, we could definitely see the potential for some scattered damaging wind gusts upwards of 50 to 40 miles per hour, potentially reaching 60 miles per hour. But later on in the afternoon, when our storms actually pass through the main risk area, we could see the potential for damaging wind gusts upwards of 60 to potentially 70 miles per hour across this region, and they could definitely be pretty widespread as well. We could definitely see some very widespread damaging wind gusts across this region, with damaging wind gusts ahead of our storms that could definitely reach upwards of 40 to potentially 50 miles per hour as well. So we could definitely see some very widespread damaging wind gusts and potentially some significant damaging wind gusts as well. Taking a look at our hail parameters and how that will indicate the risk for large hail across this region, keep in mind that this is still many hours before the actual main event, so this is not really picking it up just yet because our storms haven't even developed yet. We do have some morning convection ongoing that could definitely harbor the potential for some large hail, especially in this type of environment, but as of right now it's just not really being picked up because our main event just isn't here yet. But we do have a 20 and 16% for that stationary front or warm frontal zone across Kansas, as well as a 16 for Oklahoma. We will definitely see our large hail parameter increase over the next couple of hours as our storms develop more. And then for our significant hail, it's definitely indicating the potential for some significant hail with a 4 and a 3 and a more widespread 4 and a 4 and a more widespread 3, definitely indicating the potential for some significant hail. So we will definitely see the potential for some significant hail, and we will definitely see that risk increase later on in the afternoon. Taking a look at our surface observations that we currently have here, this may be a little bit more of a longer segment and kind of maybe just going on a whim here because we're just going to be checking out some of these surface observations and what they entail. So let's start off with the 00 UTZ balloon soundings that were not recently, these are the older ones compared to our 12Z. This does indicate a little bit of curvature in the low levels of the hodograph, but not a whole lot of instability, but definitely a deep moist layer here and some really steep low level lapse rates there in a moist layer that extends upwards of 700 millibars there. However, these are some of the older soundings, so they're not really the best to look at. Further down to the south, though, we do have a lot more instability with Cape values upwards of 3,000 joules per kilogram that was indicated in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and a little bit of curvature in the low levels of the hodograph indicating at least a little bit of a tornado risk. And our STP, effective layer STP with convective inhibition, definitely indicates the potential for tornadoes with this sounding. There is definitely tornado potential with this sounding. Same with the potential for some significant hail as well. And then we can also look at our 12Z soundings here. If we go back and go to Oklahoma here, this is truly a loaded gun sounding. We have a cap in place that is very thin, but will definitely allow for our instability to build across this region. And if we want this cap to break, we will need surface heating to extend past that cap to be warmer than the cap for our parcels to rise off the surface. And with that, there will be as a result of our dry line that will force our parcels past that cap. But we have some instability upwards of the upper 2,000 joules per kilogram of instability, which will definitely build over the next couple of hours with a fairly deep moist layer that extends past 850 millibars, doesn't quite extend all the way up to 700 millibars, but we definitely have some curvature in the low levels of the hodograph before our low level jet even increases with surface storm relative velocity upwards of 200 meters squared a second squared of storm relative velocity for that region before our low level jet even increases. And you can definitely see how our speed of our winds increases with height, and how long our tail of our hodograph is, definitely indicative of the potential for large hail as well. And this is definitely a loaded gun sounding for the potential for some significant tornadoes. Again, significant to violent tornadoes are definitely not out of the question with this. And we can also move down to the Dallas-Fort Worth region, still another very indicative loaded gun sounding. Still a very deep moist layer that doesn't really extend up to 700 millibars, is slightly shallower than the one in Oklahoma, but definitely you can see the low level hump in the hodograph there, and the potential for tornadoes with this as well, with some really decent amounts of instability upwards of 3,000 joules per kilogram. And if we move over to western Texas, this is the behind the dry line, but you can definitely see that 300 millibar, or that trough that is moving into the region here with a very large amount of speed shear, with not as much flow at the surface, but a insane amount of flow as you get into our mid and upper levels there. A very elongated hodograph indicating the potential for some large hail, but our significant hail parameter isn't going to show anything because we just don't have instability because this is behind the dry line. And as we move north into northeastern northeastern Kansas there into I'm pretty sure that's the Kansas City region. The low level jet is mostly out of the region for now, but definitely you can really see that shallow moist layer and definitely a stout elevated mixed layer here. But we also have some really decent instability here with K values upwards of 2,000 joules per kilogram and a cap in place that will need to be broken if we want storms to fire. This will probably be more so affected by our warm frontal region, but still definitely a very indicative sounding, a very scary sounding to see. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas that I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. This could definitely be a dangerous situation unfolding on later tonight. If you notice anything might have been wrong this forecast or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather, Weather Watcher, and JaxonWX. The links to those channels will be in the description. Hopefully I'll be able to see you guys on the live stream.